There was one other question that I was interested to get your thoughts on about the purchasing power of a nation state's currency. At what point do you think that the citizens and the government will start to be at loggerheads, and the citizens or the voting public will start to say, we want actual purchasing power on our nation state currency because we cannot afford anything anymore? Can you defend our currency and not trash it as much as you are right now? Do you think there's going to be a certain breaking point for that?
Yeah, I'll take a half backward step. And if I can introduce a discussion we were having today where I had one particular person mentioning that, can this currency go to zero? And there's a currency bubble. That's slightly misconstrued thinking. And I think it ties into the question you're asking. In other words, currency really is just a relative value mechanism between geophysical national border boundaries. And I know someone like Peter Schiff is, out there saying the dollar's going to zero and all these things. And I have to disagree. While he's an interesting gentleman and a lot of what he says highlights a lot of invalid and corrupt aspects of the Federal Reserve, I don't believe everything is accurate when he does that. In other words, it's like saying a relative valuation mechanism for one country is going to go to naught and therefore have zero value that makes the other rival country essentially infinite in value. It's never going to happen that in a relative value sense, we get a dollar collapse to zero, because what will the pound do? What will Britain do owning a large amount of American assets do? Surely they'll be pulled partially down by this as well. So I like people to think of currencies as parachutists that have all jumped out of the plane.
Yeah.
And are falling, and at certain, think the Bond movie, there was one stunt scene, I might be giving my age away, where, sort of Roger Moore or Jaws tilted himself vertical and then caught up with Roger Moore.
Yeah.
So he fell for a while a little faster. And then, Roger Moore picked up on the trick and did a little bit the same once the guy had managed to get the guy to let go of his ankle. And the plane is gold that actually really just maintains the same altitude, because it is what it is and it always remains what it is. And that just flies at its consistent altitude. And what you have is a variety of jumpers, a Frenchman, which would be actually the Euro. So that would be the Frenchman, the German, and the Italian all tied together in a tandem jump. The Brits, the American, the Australian, the Canadian, all with hands out and free falling. And as relatively one or two nations do something that is slightly more destructive or on a slightly percentage-based, bigger scale destructive than one of the other jumpers, they are tilting themselves vertical and plummeting a little lower in a relative valuation.
Yes.
So currency is a relative valuation, and it is kept in something. The asset wherein it is held, whether it's cash in a bank or in a bond portfolio, that the government has created a debt instrument, and that debt instrument has been sold off to a pension fund. And a pension fund that you don't know about is managing your money and has stuffed your pension contributions into supporting the other side of this debt creation by the government through a primary dealer network that includes Goldman Sachs and the silver ring, the magic circle of cartel banking, investment banking, who hold the special license for distributing government debt. You are then actually on the can for that debt. And if that debt is deemed to be valueless, your pensions have just been nullified to zero. So the asset can be zeroized. The relative value of measure is always going to have a positive value, but it can relatively move to others. But its own negative effect, given the interrelationship of all nation states and cross-holding of assets and the viability of one, if one falls, the others are adversely affected, means that I don't see any one going to zero in relative valuation to the others, because they will automatically pull the others down with them. So that just means all the divers go into a downdraft and get thrown towards planet Earth a little bit faster, because one of them pulled them into some sort of environment where that could happen. So I think part of what you're saying about purchasing power parity, that all has to now tie into this macro imagery I've given you.
Yeah.
Where relatively, in the dash to trash game, who is doing more in terms of their surface area to the terminal velocity speed of whatever 200 kilometers that you fall, to minimize that surface area so that actually can attain a relative advantage by dropping a little faster. Thereby, they reduce their goal. Let's also remember when someone like Schiff said, and he's popular and well followed, and not for bad reasons. So as I say, I'm not knocking on him. But if dollar was to go to zero, essentially the entire emerging market nation gets let off all the debt that they've raised. Do you see the control structure allowing that?
Yeah. Okay. So incidentally, Roger Moore is probably one of the best Bonds that's there ever been. But that's a great analogy. Yeah, he had the best villains as well. But also, there's two little things that spring to mind when you mention this. The first one was, if a nation state is more of a net importer, then they're going to have a little bit more problems on the currency market side in comparison to a nation state which is a net exporter. Would you say that?
Repeat it again one more time to make sure I've caught you right.
Yeah, so let's just say, for example, China is a net exporter. I don't think, well, they're going to have different problems anyway, but I'm trying to think of a country that's more of like an agricultural exporter.
Let's say New Zealand.
Yeah. So when everything starts to collapse and the domino effects hits everybody, they're going to have different currency pressures because they've still got stuff to sell in comparison to a net importer, maybe the UK. They're going to be in a different situation entirely when the purchasing power starts to collapse on them, because New Zealand's got, in the trade balance, more things to sell in comparison to the UK. So things start to become a little bit rougher at that point.
Yes. And let's add services in there. This magic thing that we happen to do out of London, which is the large amount of what we export, is services, which is all this banking vaporware, systematic financial engineering, which could all disappear on top of any major reset. So the need for fancy derivative management and the sales thereof to bankrupt small SMEs from when they buy complex option strategies that for which they have no understanding and for which the banks have not really explained the true liability they face. All of these clever services, you could even further exaggerate us. Because, you know, the biggest export is the City of London's services, which are often paralegal and investment banking orientated, and like the example I've given.
Yep.
While the nation states that actually export core consumer goods that are essential and always required, while these other financial engineering, and you may recall in the first segment that we did together, I spoke of how you could get the deflation on the financially engineered assets.
Yep.
In the same way, the trade basket, which is financial services being exported by Britain, but most else that's tangible being imported in, that's a simplification clearly, but we largely import, physicals and core durables and we export services. We'll be doubly hit in the UK when these services are recognized or destroyed in need because of any financial reset as a result of the financial engineering that go along with these services. So it would be a very bitter, dry, white season for those in the UK. And that could see extremes made in, say, the New Zealand pound exchange rate, while everybody rushes to get commodities and access, and the supply chain is a bit disrupted, and everybody really needs to, to import good, solid agricultural goods from countries like New Zealand and or Africa. And that could see, extremes made of lows for the pound in a great reset. But that wouldn't mean a go to zero scenario. It would just mean extremely negative trade deficits that could reach all-time highs and have currency effect.
Yeah. I remember one of my podcasts previously, I mentioned something on hyperinflation and the fact that everything gets reset and people start to reevaluate what is something of worth in comparison to something that's like just a service industry job where you're selling something to somebody which is like a derivative. So everything starts to come very, medieval.
Back to basics.
Yeah.
Yes. And the interesting thing is I agree with the back to basics stream. And if you listen to Jim Rogers, so I'm mentioning a number of people that maybe some of your viewers may have listened to. And I hope that's serving you. And tell me if you don't want me to do it. But I think it's good that people listen to many opinions. He says, the farmers will be the new Lamborghini owners. Now, actually, I disagree, but I don't disagree on the back to basics themes that he's implying. So the back to basics theme that he's implying is very much what we're discussing now, where things of real tangible worth that are core and essential, and a lot of the fluff and the mega bump and the hype and the BS that we've created that have part and parcel of the financial engineering experiment that may get reset are the things that are going to disappear from your trade services pile. That's a simplification. Not all our services is just bump. coming out of the UK, but I would believe that a high percentage would disappear because of the financial engineering argument I've made. The reason I don't believe the farmers, though, the people that are creating it, are going to become the absolute millionaires is the control structure is not going to allow that. And if you look at the power of the supermarket chains and the supply chain, a lot of the profit in farming has been absorbed by these people. So in the UK, it's Tesco's and Sainsbury's, etc. And even if we have breakdowns in the supply chain brought about by power or diesel prices or whatever, strikes and social unrest, I still believe that the bulk of people are going to buy through an intermediary. I wish for everyone that you establish connections with your local farmer and you do business direct with him, even if it means you pay him more than he gets from the supermarket, but you get it direct from him and you still get it for less than the supply chain. And I'd certainly encourage that as part of the active action and the way you undermine the control structure. A, you pay less, and B, you supply the real manufacturer the full value they deserve. So I would want for Jim Rogers to be more accurate. I would be comfortable with him owning Lamborghinis, although unlikely on farmland that it's the kind of thing you'd want to own, unless it was a 4x4. But the key point is do that as recourse to undermine the control structure. I'm here to help you undermine it and serve yourself. By straight away, you're getting in community, you're getting in touch, and you're getting in connected with your own localized community, and they don't want that. Yeah. They want you urbanized and reliant on their structures.
Yeah, I made another point as well. It's so valuable to actually do that very embarrassing thing to introduce yourself to people, smile at them and shake their hand and say, hey, how you doing? And things like that. It's that kind of thing, speaking to farmers, just local community, creates certain bonds, be upstanding citizen. That is that's going to be one of the main things which is going to support you in the future. As you said before, I remember watching one of your videos where you was on motorcycles through the desert. You never know who's going to be the one to help you out as you're going along, and it could be the person that you weren't so sure about. Yeah.
Absolutely. Introduce yourself to anyone, get connected. Now's everybody's chance to be a maven. And the notion that we have and that I've had is, I'm not that kind of guy. I just like to know really select group of people and that are really special. Actually, there's no one who's too stupid for you to know, in your opinion. And that's just superiority, and that's that's just ego. And there's no one too smart for you not to know. And there's no one doing things. People look down on various professions. Know your local copper. Know your local farmer. Know your local everybody. And know the people that live in the same street, and don't view them as enemies for the parking in the off-street parking. View them as extra eyes on the front. I have a base camp community for trading, and we do a whole bunch better for the fact that there's everybody on there all wanting the same thing and watching out for things. So the idea share is there. And when I put up an idea, someone reminds me something's breaking while I'm out having a dinner. I'm not 14 hours on a screen with 9 screens frying my eyeballs. I don't want that kind of existence. But I have a community that is all the way around the world, including your lovely country right there where you're staying. And we're all watching out for each other. And we have real-time access, and we have on a device, and we know if something's breaking down. And we're doing trading day today, and the euro was breaking down. We watched it happen, take out a key level. So that was unique that we were actually all together as it was happening. But it often isn't like that. So you need that sense of community in everything you do, not just in your trading community. You need it in everyone, and especially localized geographically. So things like meetup groups, go set them up. Have your D-Day prepper, make it a funny thing if you want to, your zombie day prepper meetup group, and where everyone just keeps up to date with what's going on, town council. If you have a local policeman on side, they start getting funny remits about what they need to do in the event of this and that. You start getting a twinkling that there's something going on out of the control structure earlier, and he gives you a nod or a wink and saying there's something going on, we've been told X, Y, and Z. You can actually start to join the dots a lot quicker. Maybe even become, they have these community support officers. If you can do something on a real low level, do a few hours and just be connected.
Yeah.
Just be part of, the emergency structure. Do a paramedics course and get to know the other folk, because then you get to hear what's going down, what's training. Be connected to the live networks instead of just, I just focus on this. I go to work and this is what I do professionally, and I'm a specialist at that, and I don't need to know anything. They are all looking after me. There's going to be shortages of resources. There's going to be pinches. There's going to be power downs potentially. And, people never thought of this. And the one thing about having lived in South Africa is I've seen the peculiar happen that people don't see. I saw people in the old days saying Rhodesia will never fall. to being a black government. This was being said. They weren't even thinking that, South Africa could be that. It was almost not even discussed. That was admittedly many, many years ago.
Yeah.
I've seen people think, Eskom, we provide electricity for all of Southern Africa, to South Africa actually having power cuts. I've seen them now correct that, and now I've seen them getting water cuts. And I've never thought that you would have either at any point. People say, well, that's a South African thing. It's tied to Africa and it's maybe tied to this and that. No, don't be too presumptuous. We've smothered over a whole bunch of things. Britain's got, I think, 13 days pre-advanced gas.
Yeah. The mightier they are, the harder they fall.
Yeah. Though, if things stop getting shipped for a short while, the notion that, that's only an African story is a foolhardy one. The Argentine was a massive nation of great culture. And look what they've been through. You go there, you still see the ambition of the buildings, the architecture, the tango was danced, there was a fabulous nation. It can happen to them. It can happen everywhere. And I think another chap I enjoy a lot, people should stay in touch with, is the Sovereign Man, about being fluid. I don't know if you know of Simon Black. That whole thing, he says, don't perceive because you haven't seen it in your lifetime that it isn't a potential event in the remainder of your lifetime.
Yes.
And we are all subject to that belief construct. We just, if it's never happened in our lifetime, it never can happen. And that's your default position.
Yeah.
Not because you've thought about it, just because you're not thinking about it. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And really, there's nothing to lose by this. You might just get an embarrassing, one person who's a bit of an asshole might just give you a funny stare, but majority of the time, people are actually quite nice, I find.
Oh, absolutely.
And usually you get on. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. So just one other thing I wanted to cover on the currency side. Let's just say let's play out a little possible scenario where a currency might go to zero and there's a default on the bonds. Let's just say Donald Trump goes to power. He goes, right, I'm not going to pay off these bonds and I'm going to republish a new currency. Now, that's a very high way into the future sort of scenario. Could you see a lot of republishing of new currencies? Now, the obvious one is probably Greece and the Drachma. That potentially could be re-released. How do you see that scenario play out?
Could Greece exit the euro and go back to the Drachma? Yes, they could. And I would, in fact, say I believe it would be good for them. Does the control structure in the Eurozone, did they want that to happen during all the Greek bailouts? No, they didn't. But that was pre-Brexit, where they had a full house record of keeping everyone strapped into the prison of the EU court. In my view, I see it more of a prison than an enabler.
Yeah.
So that's an opinion only. Now that Britain is moving away, if we get a real Brexit, not some fudge, which you have to maintain, could exactly be also on the cards because the people who are leading it seem to be entirely of the Remain camp. The amazing thing about Brexit is that everybody actually won the Brexit. It's promptly vanished.
Yeah.
That was their swan song and they all had to vanish for varying alleged reasons. And there were stories for each one of them as to why they were stabbed or led down. And all Theresa May had to do is stand up and remain standing. And everyone else shot themselves in the head or the foot.
Very strange,
yeah. So you got to see the hand of control structure in that, for one. But that's, once again, an opinion on balance of probabilities. Winners don't all suddenly die when the open top bus comes for the celebration parade. But in our instance, somehow it managed to happen and all the people who lost were left standing on the top of the bus. But anyway, enough said on that. So I think that maybe if Britain ends up exiting, there could be an argument that what's the precedent then that letting Greece go allows? It's already been done then if Britain is exiting. So they may soften on that. And Greece, by the way, has got a control structure government in it. Note how Greece has fallen out the headlines.
Yeah.
There was one real Greek, and his name escapes me, the gent on the bike now. I battle with the Greek names and it's not stuck. Vanopoulos or whatever.
One, yes.
And he was properly for full debt write-offs and for getting a better deal for his people. They carved around him, found some softies who could be bought off, and they had him booted out.
Yeah.
And now he's a renegade on Twitter who continues to voice from the sidelines. And there's an utterly compliant PM, and they are having the nuts squeezed out of them.
If you can check on YouTube, some of his interviews are amazing. He actually mentions a lot of the backroom conversations that he had with the board members of the EU.
Absolutely spot on. And he's a fascinating insight. And I treat him as a true freedom fighter against the control structure. So I think he's someone worth following and who can be taken at as closest to face value as you can ever take someone you haven't met. His opinions would be of interest to me, and I would possibly see myself being supportive of many of them because he's seen these discussions, and I think he's quite a smart guy as well.
Yeah.
But he refused to wear a suit and he refused to look like a corporate guy. And he was trying to make a message and put a message out to his people, that we're here as everyday people and I'm here for the people. And he had to go. And he was, and he did. And in the same way, I made comments about how I saw the cryptocurrency. I think they divided and conquered around him and kicked the good guy out. In the same way, I believe they did, the crypto with Bitcoin, how there was an attack, and then it was all about you got to comply and we won't allow you, and this is how it's going to be, and dictating and all the heat. And then suddenly he was ejected, and then largely everything's fallen off the radar and gone all quiet. Which was the same with the attacks on Bitcoin, and then change, boom, boom, bosh, and then hey, groovy and left allowed to exist. And not making the headlines anymore for being a pedophile currency and buying AK-47s and taking out hits on the dark web and all the other nonsense that was being churned up. So I think it can happen, and I think it would actually be a good thing to happen. Do they want it to happen, though? It would be a further sign of the unraveling of the EU. So I think, no, it's being resisted.
It's a bit of a problematic when I ask this question because when mentioning like a nation, there's a whole different type of dynamics which are happening with each state. I was just trying to think of off the top of my head, imagine if Japan started a new currency as well, but you get a whole raft of different situations. But on a global level, can you see the rise of nationalism and certain nation states actually just saying, we're not going to pay off these bonds and then re-establishing new currencies? Or do you think the control structure is going to just keep it all in play, just keep the system running?
I think the control structure themselves want to manage the process.
Right.
Let me also say, De La Rue is one of the big printers of notes, and I expect it to be deeply in the heart of the control structure. And I would also say most of the central banks of the world are deeply in the heart of the control structure. I think it was about 4 or 5 listings of central banks that weren't yet, and they were all on the list of soon-to-be regime change targets. Syria, Iran, and a few others.
Yes.
So my concern with all of that is that if they own the central banks and they own the money supply in each and every country, as I believe they do, then the scope for us to have independent action that is contrary to the control structure is completely not likely because it's already owned.
Sure. And
it'll comply with the wishes of the central agenda as being adhered, which is why the SDR and the IMF, and even if they discredit the then Fed, they might actively see that as part of the plan and then say, we need a global. So we can never have these imbalances and different trajectories in different nations. They're going to pretend that they are independent. And they say, it's time we had one that did it at a global level. And then you can have much smaller branches in the individual national geographic zones. So it's kind of like going from the Euro state, from nationalism to the Euro state to eventually the Eurozone is a branch to the World Bank or the IMF. And then this is where the SDRs and the basket of currencies starts to come in.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to try and keep us within the framework of what we're sitting on, the bombs that potentially are going to explode on us right now. The one things that I'd like to see your thoughts on is what Warren Buffett, I think, mentioned as financial weapons of mass destruction, the derivative time bomb. So one of the important things that I think people don't quite get a grasp of, because it takes a lot of information. There's maths, there's all these formulas and everything else that just gets really complicated. And I just would like you to see if you could boil this down for us a little bit. One of the things where there's derivative trading, we seem to have, rather than just everyone knows and has got a good account of what is trading from back and forth, everything's on these expansionary models whereby you can trade collateralized debt and then you can use somebody else to put a bet on top of that, and then somebody else puts a bet on top of that. So everything's increased on a large scale. And one of the reasons why, say, for example, banks can trade with each other and mitigate their risk is that they can use hedging tools like the Black-Scholes model. And one of the major components of that is a riskless money, the 10-year Treasury.
Yes.
So what happens when the 10-year Treasury becomes more uncertain? How does all of these derivatives and all of these trading systems start to get affected by...
Great question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get the gist of your question. In fact, I've done an MBA and we were taught the weighted average cost of capital, as many of people that might have done some degree of economics that are your listeners where you have heard about it. And you talk about the hurdle rate. In other words, what's the yield beyond that which can be earned on the risk-free rate? And the risk-free rate was always a US Treasury bill.
Yeah.
Because essentially, there was no chance that you ever not get your money back. And that's the yield you'll automatically get. No point in doing the business if it's just delivering, even if it's delivering a profit, but that profit is the risk-free rate, because you're taking a far bigger risk perceived in that business than owning a government T-bill, which was deemed zero, as near to zero as you get. Now, what's happening is, as that becomes less and less true, and the manner in which we may be reneged on is probably the dishonest way, a combination of stagflation, inflation, rewriting the rules, cutting back on state pensions and all sorts of diminishing the liabilities and the unfunded liabilities and reneging on contract that they plan, and the hyperinflating stroke deflating strategies that they'll have for devaluing these and out default as an almost honest way. The risk-free rate is completely perverse. In other words, it's my opinion that all models that used to be traditionally effective are now invalidated by exactly that which you've mentioned. In other words, the risk-free rate is not a 10-year Treasury bill. It just patently isn't. And it can't be, and it isn't. And the risk associated with owning long-run US government debt, I believe, is quite material, given a long enough time frame. So it means that all these models actually are superfluous because the distortions in the market have gone so far that they are now unsuitable.
And would you say that none of these risk managers in banks are actually pricing this in, that there is actually risk on the 10-year Treasury?
These are the future excuses that you will hear when the next collapse come. But all our models, in fact, they use it all the time. All our models were invalidated by the abnormalities of the time, and we had no other basis for valuation. What could we do? How can you blame us? You can't send us to jail. We did the best with what we had. Rada, acting dumb. It was just the perversion of the times, and it eventually reached a rate. How would we know that eventually, the US might do X, Y, and Z? Meanwhile, we've been in this slow creep, like a lava flow coming to consume your home, but is slowly moving and steaming, that you just could almost calculate the speed and the distance and say that lava is going to have enveloped this home in X amount of time and it's game up. And you don't need to be smart to see that. But they will no doubt hang the perversion of natural pricing, because the Black-Scholes model is a classic one. It's tied in with option strategies, and option strategies are intricately related to derivatives. And incidentally, while we're talking derivatives and the Warren Buffett you mentioned, it's a little bit of an irony that he's making that statement, because on the surface, I agree with him. But he used to be a hero, and I've since realized all our heroes are created for us. He is utterly co-opted into the control structure now as an individual, and he's not somebody I now see as an independent voice. Having been a massive fan, and as a younger man, as an investor, reading his books and consuming the autobiographies and the folksy kid that hustled pinball machines from young and all the way up. I think he did value, a lot of that's true, and he did value building money and all of that, but he's totally bought off. And the Goldman Sachs convertible debt and the derivatives he's used himself since prove that it's a great quote, but unfortunately his alignment has to be questioned now.
So one of the weird things right now, if you was a financial regulator, is that would you expect that a lot of the banks are perverting their models? As a financial regulator, it's just too complicated to work out what's going on. You can't really go in there and work out all these models and see where they're coming from, because they can just fog you and take you off a different dreary state. So really the role of a financial regulator to work out what these problems are and say, right, we need to stop this from happening, outlaw this kind of doing. How would you take that?
Well, it's kind of like the commission for 9/11. Just underfund it, fill it up with stooges and patsies, and very harshly define the scope inside which they can play, keeping them out of any areas of real danger, and design it to fail. Because it is underfunded. Anybody who asks too many awkward questions will probably see his career inhibited, rather than prohibited, you'll be labeled and tagged a non-business enabler. And the politics and the light touch regulators will say, well, you're overreaching and all of this stuff. And the people with the big money has the big lobby. And the one with the bigger lobby ends up getting the most of the ear and will say, these people just aren't pro-business. They keep asking the wrong questions and going in here. So it's the law of money, I'm afraid. Might is right.
Yeah.
And so regulation is largely, in my view, underfunded. And then you take the absolute switchy, the career enhancement of first being a regulator, poacher turned gamekeeper, back to poacher, back to gamekeeper. And it looks like, Monsanto's directors on the FDA, they just keep swapping every couple of years. You go from the FCA to great big money in the city. So I have insufficient faith in the quality of regulation. I think the understanding of the complexity is probably largely misunderstood, and the full externalities, the effect on the larger society of what looks like, listen, this is just us hedging this, doing X, Y, and Z. The full externalities of the knock-on effects when they get these things wrong are never taken into account in terms of decisions. And so these people can gamble the system. If you remember our short passage on control fraud, you just go for short-term gain at the cost of the system, and there's no one there policing you for that. And there's an externality to it. It's like the polluter that's making lots of money and saying, yeah, we're good for exports and we're doing this, but is pumping mercury into the river. Don't stop business. And he has the money and he has the lobby groups, and it's really hard. Only this mercury you don't see. It's behind closed doors in meetings. It's a poison that hides, that is not visible, like the river where the fish start popping up dead. This is nods and winks. And let that go, and we can't be involved in everything, and we have limited staff and resources and pragmatic decisions, etc.
I can feel that people are going to look back at the history book and say, what was wrong with us? Why did we make this mistake 2008, and now we've just repeated ourselves like literally within 10 years' time straight after?
I think regularly that this entire moment and period, macroeconomically, is going to be case study for multiple, possibly centuries of the coming of the end of time economically. Think how much we just referred to the US and the depression there as an economic file. And then we look at the globalized scale and the perversion of our system at this point. This truly is history in the making of an economic nature. And I hope to God that they don't tie too big a geopolitical event along with it. As an even massive, larger distraction. That is my big hope. And unfortunately, I think militarization and the might being right that I've already referred to in terms of defense and resources and, chucking weight around is the last gasp and the refuge of scoundrels for a failing Ponzi scheme. And I do fear that. It has to be said. And that sounds overtly negative, and it's difficult to put a positive spin on it. But the point is a little bit like we spoke. I don't know if we got this on record last time, but it's kind of the Shawshank Redemption. There is a shit pipe to be crawled through here. We either stay in this parallel universe prison existence, or you got to take some action and climb through that shit pipe and get out the other side to the freedom, the yacht, and the reward that you took with you because you positioned correctly. If you remember the character in the Shawshank Redemption, I feel it's that moment, and the prison isn't going to exist forever. The police are coming. They arrested that main warden who was stealing and all of that. That moment is coming. So you have to try to be the guy that gets out. And I see the control structure a little bit like that. My only concern is in getting out, I worry that the same people that have created this cycle are so deeply entrenched as a Trojan virus in every religion and in every control structure. And there's so many, and they're so used to leading, and there's so few people used to leading in the 99% who are not part of the cabal, that they just reset the clock, and the same guys are running the show, and just reset the clock and start again and renege on a whole bunch of people after a major conflict and say, look, this has all changed and this is how we're doing it. And it wouldn't surprise me if the solution, for which the problem is still coming, and which we will then give the automatic emotive reaction to, because if there's horror sent to us, we will respond in kind, regardless, even if we know we're being played, is all going to materialize. And I would most want to see, the active members, the dark hand behind the curtain. I'm looking for justice, And something that I'm really passionate about is that day in The Hague. We had a Truth and Reconciliation Committee in South Africa, and I think that was a microcosm of many things. I would like a global macroeconomic and political Truth and Reconciliation Committee for anything that happens, because I will hold the people responsible, for the lives lost in trying to disguise an economic reset in a major geopolitical event. And I want to see them in The Hague. I want from Greenspan to Blair to Bush and the people behind them, the names that people don't know, the big family, old money names. I want them in there. I want to see them questioned. I want a real Nuremberg trial, not a show trial. I want a Nuremberg trial for the economic crimes against humanity. And I'd love to see that happen. And I think I'm living in a pipe dream, believing that it's possible, but you can only hope.
Yeah. I'm just going to bring us into this question. So on the demographic side, how do you see this great conversion which is happening right now? Because you could say that there's different sort of segments of society. Firstly, you've got that generation between like the 1940s and 1980s who are pretty much the asset holders. They're getting a little bit older now, and potentially they're thinking about retiring and selling up and potentially moving on into ferry cruises and golf holidays and things like that. And then on the other side, you've got the non-asset holders, which I would say is probably early 80s up until now generation, who literally have never got onto the housing ladder. They've got no chance of getting there. And we've become a little bit more of a society where, say if housing affordability was really cheap, I think a lot of people would have just started a family fairly early on, maybe even started families like in their early 20s. Now we've got a lot of people that are getting way on there. People are using IVF to start families. There's a very strange demographic thing which is happening. Let's just say, for example, on the west side, maybe not the new immigration, but on the west side. So I'm just trying to give you a little bit of a sort of a picture of a broad aspect of what's happening in demographics. How do you analyze that from your position?
It's an interesting one. There is a dynamic that the greater the education level, etc., and the professionalism of the people involved, the later the age for starting a family. That seemed normal and seemed like an affluence element. But there's a separate point that you touched on, and that was the availability and affordability of property. And as a financially engineered product that's designed to create an tertiary event that sees you on the wrong side of a compound interest equation to the benefit of the banking cartel, this has been pushed to its natural extreme. And as a result, people are no longer able to qualify for that. Whether that is playing into them not wanting to have children, I think that might be an element. There's something about rental property that doesn't feel like a nested home for a woman in particularly, but certainly for a man too. So you don't feel like you're landed and grounded. This said, if you look at penetration of rental and families in Italy, it's something people get over because ownership is something that's very much a mid-40s, late 40s thing in the country, say as Italy. Culturally in the UK and potentially of English-speaking westernized nations, that might be deemed very late in the curve, and you feel still a bit like on mama and papa's umbilical cord to a reduced rate by still being a letting tenant, even while in the workspace, while your parents are on the property ladder. And they may feel some sense of obligation to get people up. Only they won't have the money as the pensions all drain away in many cases. And you may have to wait for the post-financial engineering reset to see where this deflated engineered products actually end at a pricing point.
Yes.
I think they have to come down, and I think that's one place where Harry Dent is correct. So I've differentiated myself a little bit from Jim Rogers, and I've also aligned myself with him where I think he's right and why I think he won't go all the way down to the farmers, and where I differentiate with him. Where I align with him is that all bubbles will end. I do agree with that. And bubbles are just literally leverage induced by the banking system, overvaluated assets, wherever there's, as I say, some degree of financial engineering.
Yeah.
So largely, I believe that property is overvalued. on the valuations, I was actually talking to a Turk today who's a civil engineer, who's a reasonably respectable job and is married and has a child, and he's renting here. And he was calculating that for his joint income, for the multiple that most banks have, I think he would need, close to £300,000 joint salary to have the kind of property that he exposed. And that didn't seem like it was going to be, a highly exotic one. So, I think there was generation. You may remember the Bush speech where he says, I was being a cheerleader for homes and the American dream and how everyone got to have a home and how I was making everyone part. It's almost had the homeowner generation, which was a fake bubble that was pushed too far thanks to Greenspan, the liquidity experiment, the low cost of money, et cetera, and of course the corruptibility of the securitization of bad quality loans that saw you be able to make money pushing these loans, but you didn't have to worry about the quality of what you created, and you repackaged it for unknowing investors to buy that was overly rated by complicit rating agencies. So if we just look past the scam there, we had whatever you overextend in one direction, there's a natural geometry. And I actually trade this. It's in my technical analysis, my trading program. And it's funny how trading and whatever you do in work you tend to see parallels in life. Wherever you overextend home ownership to points where it shouldn't have gone, you will underextend it by virtue of the rubber band springing back. In other words, you pass that natural balance point with the pace and the momentum that's created by the unraveling of the previous overextension. And so we'll actually go to a highly privileged elite that could be property owners that'll have a lot of properties and wealth, and a renting class that will be highly expanded.
So I'm trying to come from this perspective, like two polar opposites, the mamas and papas as the asset holder generation and the youth generation who never really have got the leg start up there, got tons of student debt. There's not really much in terms of things to aspire to in being born into this world right now as we're living in it. But let's say, for example, I've just noticed in like Australia, Labour government almost come into power just on a mandate of gradually releasing out negative gearing. So that's when you accumulate losses because you're not making enough on your rents, you can use that as a tax deductible to keep themselves solvent as long as possible, not actually to force people who are property investors to sell. So can you see like a voting dynamic, like the voting block of the youth?
Is that for investment property that's let out or primary homes?
Investment property.
Yes. Okay. But that's actually encouraging a landlord class, which by definition sees less home ownership as more people can't get on that ladder and then have to rent.
The government's view is probably to say we're going to try and keep rentals as low as possible. So it makes housing more affordable at a rent basis.
Wow. I don't get the logic on that. So they are going to make for a landlord who is a multiple homeowner, apart from his own primary home, they're going to give incentives where he can deduct any shortfalls from his tax return as a negative income in an effort to make more reasonable rent payments.
Correct, yes. The Labour government here wanted to phase that out gradually. They almost got into power. I thought that was quite a good little mandate that they were going to stand on. But then the Liberals just got in. I'm noting this demographic voting shift, which is quite interesting, and I just wondered how you could see that play out.
I still haven't fully understood the primary logic, because it seems that it'll perpetuate landlording.
Yes. Rather
than forcing them to divest and actually sell to buy to lives at lower prices because they can't sell to other investors because they're also or not interested in accumulating. So the perk that actually makes it tax deductible actually encourages more landlording and a bigger rental class and less home ownership. So who was for that? Was the Labour government that wanted to was for it or removing it?
Yeah, sorry. Let me explain that one. Last election we had, Labour wanted to gradually phase it out. So they were probably more pro-youth, and the Liberals wanted to keep it established. And they said that it wasn't really a problem.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the protection of the middle class on the ladder versus those that are not. So it's very much a cross-generational thing, although there could also be an income class thing, which is why the Labour would also support it. In other words, the middle class versus the working class, if that's it's not really an income group, but it's a traditional English reference.
Yes.
Which may not apply to you, but They're doing the exact opposite in Britain, and they're attacking the middle class, and they're actually saying the mortgage payment is no longer deductible from the rent. In other words, income only being charged on the difference. So you will pay full tax on the entire rental income. Mortgage payment is not deductible. And the crazy thing, just to contrast three different geographies, is that the US actually has a system on your primary home where your mortgage payment is deductible.
Right. Okay.
So it actually incentivizes you to have the biggest stuff off mortgage you can get.
Yeah.
By underwriting, because you then get the deduction against income. So even billionaires with tax planning would, certainly if it's in their own name, which it may not be, it may be in complex offshore structures as well, but you'd certainly put a massive mortgage on it, even if you put a savings account with the same company to the equivalent amount for their underwriting happiness. You would certainly want a mortgage and as big as possible. So there's three different approaches there, and they all incentivize different things. If you're asking me which is the more socially equitable, as someone who's sitting here, well, it all depends from whence you stand. If you have listeners that are property investors that are Australian and have multiple listed investment properties, they're not going to like me saying I preferred the Labour's option, because what's happening is the barrier to entry is being raised and raised and raised. And people that have got through the gate are getting benefits and incentives that others that aren't in a stronger position because they've been caught earlier in their life cycle can't get on. So I would actually, while I'm not a natural Labour supporter, I would actually say equitability should be the yardstick.
Yeah.
And entrenching certain generational or income rights over another is exceeding or is extending what the problem we already have, that of the 1% versus the 99%. And the whole Gini curve has never been more bent out of shape than it is today. So I'm all for the fattening up of the middle and the trimming of the outlier extremes. So that's my take.
As a trader, do you always have to see that gradually this elderly class are going to move on? You're probably going to see like elderly care is going to be like a massive boom sector. And then this younger youth phase, which is kicking in and gradually are going to be bigger and larger, they're potentially going to be a massive rental class, and they're going to start to demand more off the masses. So in a democracy, you get these big changing shifts in the economy, which is directed by what people demand.
Yes. And what will eventually happen is as more of the elderly entrenched elite start dying off and more of the locked out get into voting classes, the likes of the Labour in your example will start to get more support. And what that'll do is then force your Liberal and your other parties to also start bending lest they be thrown out of power. So eventually governments of the day bend to the voting class. The problem with the youth is they don't show up, they don't turn out, and the old do.
Yes.
And that's what people learnt on the Brexit. I don't actually believe in any of the governments, and I would support mass non-voting and a massive disenchanted, seething populace that is just refusing to endorse the entire structure. So I'm what you would call a radical and an activist. I would put the wind up the sails, the entire system. So that's my chosen strategy, and it's probably deemed very aggressive.
Yeah.
But people that play in the game, and I try to discourage that personally, but were you too, given the lesser of certain evils, you would probably go the Labour option in terms of that housing policy.
I just want to classify you a little bit, if you don't mind. Would you say that you're a minarchist, so the smallest state possible, maybe law courts, police and national defence, and then a capitalist at the same time?
The phrase capitalist is greatly tarnished, and I'm a believer in an unfettered market price discovery mechanism where there are no tax-funded elephants distorting the system.
Yes.
So that is what's often known as free markets. That used to be known as free markets. I think anything that the state gets involved in, especially with our money, it leads to corruption, it leads to lobbyism, and it leads to special interests, and it leads to backhanders and bungs. So I just want the government out of as much as is humanly possible. I want it small and fearing its citizenry. So I'm very much in the libertarian camp on that matter.
Sure.
I think what's happened is government has continued to grow. If you look at the situation in terms of tax rates when they were first intervened, there was one tax and it was about 3 or 4% in America. I can't remember exactly what it was.
Yeah.
Now look at our system. we're taxed on everything. There's VAT on everything. There's VAT on everything you buy. There's indirect taxes. There's going to be charges for using roads that were built years ago as taxes. And they will say, reduce the traffic in rush hour and all of that. We're incentivizing more moderated. So they'll have a sliding scale depending on what time you do it. And you'll have a card that'll be dipped into every time.
Yep.
And all of these things. Turkeys don't vote for Christmas. And we need a big fat Christmas and a slaughtering of the turkeys. These guys have expanded and expanded on a multi-generational basis that many people don't realize how far we've come in tax rates. Even here in the UK, the super tax bracket, as it used to be called. Note how these things get rebranded as now a simple constable now falls in the super tax bracket here in the UK, which is the 40% rate.
Yeah.
Of any year standing. And nurses, nursing sisters. This used to capture Mr. Megabucks. Everyone else paid, 22 or 25%. And used to capture just a small, now it's a standard, not even middle class. It's sort of upper working class, lower middle class, whatever you want to determine structures. They're paying a certain element of super tax, which is no longer called a super tax. It's just called the sliding rate now, and that's one of the scales. These things all advance. Parasites do what parasites do. They suck more and more blood and get bigger and fatter.
Sure.
And it's time for the dipping tanks. It's time to shed them all off. It's time for liberty. It's time for space. And people, you will get some, I upset a lot of people with this view. And you are going to get the lovies that say, but we need government and we need people to do this and we need that. And what about pollution? And what about, externalities, which is the economic phrase for when people produce things and there's adverse effects caused by them.
Yep.
And I believe we do need a degree of organizations that look after this. But I think the whole system is overly weighted in government and regulation, and it needs a full simplification process of absolutely everything. And it's become so detailed, so laborious. No one knows the rules, and people therefore have entire jobs and careers just by being someone who knows the degree of the rules.
Yep.
And as it gets bigger, it becomes more powerful because it has scale. It has massive budgets. So now they want to spy on you. They want your accountants to spy on you. And suddenly it's totally adversarial. The government that's supposed to be serving you is policing you.
That's true.
Is investigating you, is collecting information on you, has drifts fed you into all sorts of anti-libertarian actions. It's time they were made to back the fuck off, to excuse my language.
That's fair enough.
Right back to where they were, and they feared the citizenry and the pitchfork. And that's my take. They really need to be put right back in the can, and they've gone way, way too far, in my view.
Interesting you mentioned that. There's been a lot of situations where a civilization has come to a great power point and then it falls. And it really is, it falls on the backbone that everything just gets hyper-regulated. Tax people just come out of everywhere and everyone wants to tax you for everything. And the actual time in which civilization can start over again is when people just look at all the regulations, the thousands of laws which are going to get passed, which are getting passed pretty much every week. It just gets brushed to the side and say, look, market, work it out now because we've just complicated this so much. Time to start again. But what I want to cover now, interrupt me at any stage here, I just want to just outline, these are my idea points of, or our idea points of where the government is going to manage failure. So the first point would be the debt jubilee and debt forgiveness. I think both you and I believe that won't happen.
There's never a free lunch. If there was a situation like that, what would they forego? And on the surface, whatever you forewent for that debt forgiveness would end up being a far bigger gift than you realized you were giving them. In other words, they're very clever at the sleight of hand of exchange. They will always extract their pound of flesh.
True.
So that's my comment on debt forgiveness.
Breaking out the banks and securing the depositors' money.
I think, we used to have a culture when my father grew up that there were building societies and you saved with them to buy a home and they just lent money for homes.
Yeah.
And it was very frugally done. In fact, ironically, having the South African banking system is extremely old school and quite solid. And they didn't get caught up in subprime. I don't think Australia's did particularly. I don't think you were buying because of the investment banking thing. The casino bank is the issue. If it was just home lending, and there wasn't, central banks coordinating a liquidity deluge, I don't think we would have had any of these problems. We would have had minor possible inflation. largely contained central bankers that reined it back in and kept you, on the verge of recession if you needed it, so things didn't get too out of hand, and just kept the brakes on when they did it, and there was no expansion of liquidity. The thing that's caused the whiplash upside is the thing that's going to cause the resulting whiplash downside that needs the detoxification. So as joyous as you get snorting your cocaine, injecting your heroin, and drinking your 12 beers, is as bad you're going to feel the next day. And the whole feel-good factor of the Goldilocks Greenspan era has yet to be properly detoxed. And we had multi-decade running from 1987 when he was in till when he stood down. And then his successor, while I don't have lots of sympathy for him and don't hold him in high esteem, was given a hell of a poison chalice and just had to perpetuate what was previously done. Otherwise, he'd be Mr. Unpopular.
That's true.
So, as I said about the politically, if you ask me what I'd do, I'd push everything into recession. You don't win political elections on that as a rule. I'm going to force us back to a line of sustainability and detox all the rubbish we've inhaled. And it's going to hurt like hell. And you're going to vote me in to finish this process in the next 4 years again. It's just not a winning, it's just not a winning strapline. So, do whatever you can to perpetuate the illusion. You've sold us this fantasy to keep the fantasy going because you've trained people into a no pain economy. And the no pain, actually, we've been putting ourselves on painkillers for even the slightest amount of pain, and we've deadened our nerves. More importantly, maybe we've made them hypersensitive, and we're getting diminishing returns out of the drug. And now we really need to feel the pain, and now we're hypersensitive, and it's going to hurt even more than it would have done if we'd done it earlier. So there's that natural. So we've overrun on everything. There's no way out. But the Shawshank Redemption's crap pipe. You have to crawl out of that prison that you made for yourself.
Okay, so with the government here, I would imagine the government's going to keep the zombie banks going. They're going to all turn Japanese around the world. More regulations going to come through, and that regulation is probably going to keep the top guys in play and probably stave off the small guys. And then we get to the key point of what maybe the government does with this failure point. Confiscation of wealth and the
more
new blame game.
Yeah, exactly. It gets all the more draconian. So what they continue to do is they perpetuate the ongoing of the failed structures.
Yes.
On an ever ongoing basis, committing ever more resources in a diminishing returns base to continue to support them. And they do this at the cost of the citizenry, which sees you be squeezed ever harder as they show that they're trying to maintain system maintenance, and they actually perpetuate its eventual failure from a far bigger height because they just want to be after me the storm, Louis the 15th. It is like Ayn Rand, if you've read the book, where eventually all the real capitalists get forced out into a separate nation where everything works and business is incentivized, not punished, and success is incentivized, not punished.
Yep.
But what happens is eventually the few wealth producers that are genuine and are not mega corporatized with special interest lobby groups, all the big corporations in the EU that have, the better part of 65,000 lobbyists lobbying about 50,000 bureaucrats, that corruption, that utter corruption that sees things only go their way generally, and the SMEs will be crushed largely because they won't be able to compete with the red tape and the burdens. So more bureaucracy, more jobs for pushing paper around and saying we are compliant with this, we're compliant with that. And, it's such a sclerotic economy that things get harder and harder and harder. And actually, we have to wish for the crash, even though it's wishing for an exceedingly unpainful event. It's kind of like you're in a really bad marriage, and you just need it to end.
Yeah.
Even though the entire divorce process and the unwinding of assets is going to be...
It's going to strip you of all your assets.
Yeah, it's going to strip you of all your assets, and you're going to come out really light and really busted. But the truth is you have whatever time and freedom you were given, at birth, less the time you've wasted. And the longer they perpetuate the zombieism and they make it goes further extreme, the more perverse the kind of rules and regs that have to come out and the support, and the more they'll be sending out food stamps for the absolute poor, and the more the stagflation. So eventually the 1%ers are all dodging the tax like all hell and gone. I think Apple paid 0.005%, less than 1%, not less than 1/100%, half 1/100%. here. The poor is being picked up by the battered middle classes and lower middle classes who can't avoid tax, who are on pay as you earn, rip it out your wallet stuff. The more they punish us, and they'll print more money, and then they say, we can't really do any more tax increases, so we'll just devalue the currency. So your cost of your goods go up. It's the same as a tax increase. Destroying your currency is the same as a tax increase. It's the same as inflation. It's the same as a tax increase. Inflation and taxation are one and the same thing in collective net effect. If we double the amount of money in circulation, the buying power of the cash in your wallet and your bank account is halved.
Yeah.
And it may take a while before that reflects, because that money is being collected in a little sack that's just going via the banking system and pushing asset prices ever higher, or holding them at that super elevated state while they're in a stall. But in the long run, your stagflationary forces, like your buying in of your agricultural products from New Zealand, just keep getting more and more expensive because your depreciated currency. I mean, the UK is feeling the currency depreciation and inflation number right now on account of little uptick in oil and the better part of 6% sort of flash crash after an already Brexit depreciation in the pound. Now, everyone will kind of have that, but they can't all have the currency at the same time because somebody's obviously going to be holding value. We're going to see that stagflation, and then it'll stay there for us, even when the pound re-rallies, because the squeeze is there and that extra money is now making it into the system, and we're feeling that QE effect of diminishment. And then someone else will devalue a little bit relative to us, and they'll get onto that stagflationary ladder, and then the money that gets printed will also start bleeding in. So they'll stay at that slightly more squeezed, disposable state. And each one of us continue to get that, though. So till eventually the people that don't escape any tax are the people that are covering and being squeezed the hardest. You've got to remember, we used to have exceedingly low tax. As I was saying, in the US, I think the first, it's worth probably Googling for being accurate, what was first income tax rate in the US, because I've mentioned it now a few times. First, and it was the only tax. And at that time, only the husband worked. So what's actually happened is we're feeling more squeezed, poorer on double income families, where the control structure gets access to our kids even sooner because they bounce them into education sooner than they used to go. That's ridiculously early here. They're still basically infants as far as I'm concerned. And we're on a double income salary. And we're actually poorer then.
Yeah. When
you're a single lot holder, libertarian farmer out west in the US paying the first tax rate, I can't remember how many years ago. So I'm actually I've got to do this Google just to give you an accurate number. But
sure.
I think the first income tax rate, I've gone and clicked on the wiki page, which is invariably going to be a whole host of misinformation and waffle. History of the income tax in the United States. I mean, I don't know why we're doing the United States. I'm talking to you in Australia, and I'm living in the UK. But it
was significantly low, wasn't it? And that pretty much served the whole framework of government.
That's right. And they ran a tight, small ship, and it pretty much served the bulk of government, exactly as you say.
Yeah.
To support the Civil War, Congress enacted the national first income tax law. It was a forerunner of our modern income tax, 3%. That's what I remember. That's right.
Gosh, I'd like 3%.
A person earning from $600 to $10,000 per year paid tax at 3%. Now, this was actually done by Mike Maloney, another interesting guy and worth dropping a name in.
Yes.
He was highlighting this recently, and I commend him for that. And it's worth reminding, there was no other taxations, and you paid one lot of 3%. And one earner earned all that you needed for family. Now, he got his father's tax return from that era. I think he was plumbing parts salesman, nothing glamorous. And he made $6,000, and he was able to buy a property, and his property was worth, in percentage terms, not significantly more than his total annual salary. I think he could buy his property for about 10 or 12 grand. And you look at now the equivalent property, and you look at the net salary after tax, and that ratio has just swung. These guys, the pests, the parasites, are flipping huge.
It's true.
There's lots of them, and they are full of blood. They're like big ass ticks that are the size of dogs hanging off this dying cow.
And just to break in there, actually, the reason why this is all happening is that the bankers in the background are perfectly hedging themselves, thinking that they're flat on any kind of risk. But unbehold to them, their models have failed.
Well, the models have failed completely with what we were talking about on the risk-free rate. And that's the whole principle of the CAPM pricing model.
Yep.
the weighted average cost of capital, and that all falls apart. Net present values and discounted cash flows, that everything that goes with that mathematics in terms of the risk-free, it's just completely, there's no benchmark anymore.
Okay, so what I want to continue on from this point is the blame game. So who's going to be the new enemy of the state? Because we've got Russia, China, the 1%, the benefit class, immigration, or radical terrorism.
Whoever is presented as it by the mainstream media is not it and is the misdirect.
Right.
So if you're seeing a lot about Russia and, they're so aggressive and they're stirring all this nonsense, it's not it. So they're putting forward enemies. They want hate. They want to direct people's anger. The problem they have when these major shifts occur, that suddenly people realize that they've been fleeced for a lifetime. A multi-generational fleecing game has been at play. The usury extractors have once again run their full cycle of course and want to reset the clock so they can do it all again. They are experts, and this is why they have absolute control over the mainstream media, of creating a hate figure for you. So for the left-leaning person in the US, it's Donald Trump. He's the most vile thing in the world. This is just a big extended apprentice show for him. This is all just Punch and Judy show for him. Why would you want, as a billionaire, to be the president of America? To put it on your CV? You don't care about CV anymore. You're not applying for a job anywhere. I can't think of anything to be loathed and to have to work hard and fly around, even if you're not really that powerful. I wouldn't want that job. The really smart people are exceedingly rich and behind the scenes and anonymous. Think about it. If you were obscenely wealthy that created unwanted attention on you, would you want that fact to be known? I mean, I call the modern day the adult Santa Claus and Tooth Fairy, the notion in that Bill Gates and Carlos Slim are the richest people in the world. That is one of the mainstream media's regularly repeated mantras for you to absorb. That right there is, here's your rich heroes. All the other people and the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers lost all their wealth, was diminished immensely during these and that. I don't know. What absolute nonsense. What absolute nonsense that all the richest people in the world are first generation money. What absolute horse crap. How can that possibly be? Most people will labor under that. And this is the extent that the mainstream media goes to misdirect and to shield the really violently rich people.
I'm interested on your points here, actually, where you mentioned power structures, because I know a lot of economists, they'll talk about the economy and they'll state this, that, and the other, but you're very interesting because you will put the target sites on control structures. So how deep would you say it goes? I mean, I guess you're not in backroom meetings doing funny handshakes and stuff like that, but how colluded is the system, would you say?
Anything that represented some degree of organized, secretive society, and anything that resembled some sort of historical ability to control structure, such as religious structures, are all penetrated. From Islam to Christianity, whether you go Jesuit, whether you go the traditional religion control structures, right through to who you think are supposedly do-gooder charities and even World Animal, WWF, right through to World Health Organization, all these global special interest groups doing good on your behalf. There's a great saying, altruism, anything that seems to have an organizational altruism is compensating for the shame and guilt of past and hidden agendas and of the future. That is the true basis of altruism.
I just want to bring us back. You mentioned about Donald Trump and saying, I don't really understand his motives. He's a rich man. What's the point? Do you think there's a hidden hand there as well?
Yeah, they're both controlled. These people, I think, are selected really young. The scope that shocks everybody is the scale of it. One of the great things that I think it might have been allegedly put to Rommel, so I'll repeat it on the basis that that's what I understand was said. I can't obviously confirm that, is that you need to tell the biggest lie. And the scale of the conspiracy also, as a separate statement, the biggest lie always wins. And the scale of the conspiracy needs to be so large that it is beyond even comprehension. So at that point, the person is so lost in the size of the set. Think the Truman Show. the film?
Yes.
Everybody, the postman, everybody was in on it. He thought, the guy, the driver, and the light fell out of the sky that he thought was the light. And there it had the name of the star that was meant to be. The details have been looked after. Your heroes are created for you. I was born in South Africa. I'd love for Elon Musk to be this swashbuckling, inspired mission man that we are being.
Iron Man, yeah.
But I'm afraid he's not the real world Iron Man. I know my father tried many times as an engineer with German car companies to get the battery operated car going in the 70s of the petrol crisis, and was crushed. And was crushed by the petrol and oil lobby in the US. Right down to the recent A-Class Mercedes, which has the slab flat sides, and that fell over in the bends of about 6 or 7 years ago all the time. It fell over because it was meant to have a battery in the bedpan. And it meant to have a much lower center of gravity, that those sides wouldn't have mattered. And that to convert it to a petrol car, because once again, the California and all the US-based industry squashed that battery car from running. So now Elon has been given the right, and he's now the guy that we're meant to believe here's the first guy who decided on, hybrid driving cars. Well, the Rockefeller tax people have decided to let him be the front man of this. Wow, look how the US is taking us forward here, and look how this visionary is going forward, and he's building all of this stuff. This guy had about 11% of PayPal. There's probably in and around 100 million quid. How the hell is he running a SpaceX program, flying rockets with no bloody payback at all and no ROI into allegedly space, and going to apparently colonize Mars for us, even though we've never once revisited the moon, which we're supposed to have visited, and colonize that, which is far closer, far more habitable and less hot. I mean, listen to this just horse shit that's been thrown out. Even your heroes are being paid, and everyone on Facebook is sharing this guy. And I want him. I would love a South African hero. I'd love this visionary. He's a great salesman. It's almost as Steve Jobs was fading away. Here's this guy emerging as the presentation with these ephemerical, highly ethical, business, spiritual, aspirational, and it's all horse. He's been allowed to bring those kind of vehicles because it's the time for the self-driving car. They've decided it's the time. Technology has existed for a long, long time, and we could have invested in battery and lithium and all of these things on a much bigger scale. They would have advanced it and accelerated a long time ago. But they wanted that internal combustion engine to carry on running. They wanted it to keep burning oil and throwing out carbon out into the sky. They wanted the petrodollar to be continually sustained. They decide when they're folding in an era for another era, and it's got a confluence with their agenda.
So I just want to get the way that you picture it. So is it the case that you're a trader and you say, look, this doesn't make sense. I've got no idea why this trade's going in this direction. And then once you put the jigsaw puzzle piece in there and say, maybe somebody's behind this, then things start to make a lot more sense. And then do you provide that with a little bit more evidence, the situation of what has happened historically with these very big
we were
these
talking
rich
about this
families in the
today.
background?
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. We're talking about this today. I mean, I put a forecast on one of the things I'm known for is calling the Euro Swiss francs collapse multiple times in 2009 and again when the floor was pulled. And I'll just talk about the second one. When the floor was pulled, I said in October that in January that this would fail and that they were leaning on this 1.2 and it would fail, and it was evidential, and that there was clearly European pain going on, and there was clearly a lot of euro buying going on by the Swiss National Bank, and there would going to be a limit because the Swiss have the cantons. They don't want all their money invested in depreciating asset like the euro, and they'd already had they were planning a referendum on gold. Can they force their central bank to hold gold? There was a structural stress in there. And I said Q1 next year, which was me talking in 14 about Q1 15, we're going to have a substantial collapse that could lead to a massive overnight move in the euro Swiss franc. And I did the YouTube clips. It's on there. It's on YouTube. And that's going to be, a 3,000 pip plus move for those in the trading, or, 30% potentially. And all of that's great. Then in November, coming to that year end and me sticking by that rule, and I appeared on Tip TV and I made that call as well. The head of the then Swiss National Bank came out. They'd actually fired one who had a wife who was speculating on the currency, by the way, prior to him. So this is the guy that followed the crook. I have no illusion about the morality of these guys and the insider trading. Anyway, this new guy came in, and he was in for a while, and then he stated, when questioned, The floor between the euro and the Swiss franc is central to our policy in the beginning of December. I can't remember last day of November or first week of December. And I came out after that once I'd heard that and I said, that's it. They're definitely taking strain. And rather than Q1, I think this is going to be cooked in January. Because I knew Draghi had a major speech to talk on the euro situation. The tension was building really high and he'd been disappointing many, many times. I said, January, we're going to have that collapse. I pulled it forward from a full quarter and said January. And it was a probability-based assessment. It's not genius. I believe anyone could have actually done it if they sat and took the time and assessed the facts. So what actually happened is a control structure member said one thing and it actually affirmed to me the exact opposite. And funnily enough, that's Masonic. The inverse is true. There's a reason why people say, playing all the little silly rumors that you hear about playing records backwards and coming on. And it worried me immensely when Theresa May said Brexit means Brexit, because I took that to mean Brexit means not Brexit, a soft, cagey thing. So they try to reassure you on exactly that where they're going to stab you. So the minute he said that, I thought, that's it. He's talking absolute crap. And then the whole point being, he doesn't work for me. His whole game is to misdirect me. He represents the people he works for. And the last thing he needs is everyone else catching up with the game before they've had time to position for it. They need it to be a surprise. So you need to understand who these people work for. If you think government and you think central bankers are working for the greater good of you, Joe citizen, then I've got a bridge to sell you. I can't put it more bluntly and acerbically than that. They do according to their paymasters' will and who best serves them. And they can't have a disorderly.
All right, let me just outline a premise here. So people in power always want more power. So currently we have a globe which has got loads of different nation states, different currencies, different governments, and it's a little bit choppy all over the world. Now, say if I'm this multi-billionaire who wants to control the world, okay, wouldn't you say that to create...
you'd be a trillionaire.
Trillionaire. Yeah, so let's just say, wouldn't the best plan to do, create some kind of conflict, create maybe a third world war, create some massive problems around the world, and then restart again from scratch, start a new currency, and then that currency will be the new world currency, and then you have the ultimate power of the world. I know we're going way into some kind of megalomaniac's mind here, but would you say that's the end game?
Yes, I don't think it's any one individual. I think that there's a group of people right at the very top who are cooperating, and then they have people at different levels. So the people that know the full plan, like you've described it, which I think is a potentially quite viable probability, although it doesn't have to be that way. And I hope to some degree it isn't. But what happens is some people have parts thereof, but very few people have all the parts in terms of knowing the whole game. But enough people know. And let's say the consequence of spilling those beans is pretty flipping awful. And even when they have slipped out and they've got out, they've misinformed around it, created counter narratives, and just muddied the water up. That even when you have had legitimate leaks, you've got the Aaron Russo YouTube clips, who actually was befriended by one of the Rockefeller families, who told him quite a lot. And he did a reveal on that. And then he died quite shortly afterwards of cancer. And I don't know if you've watched those, so I won't give you rhyme and verse on them if you know them. But your listeners might value having a look at that. But I mean, he explained, the feminist movements that was funded. He explained why, doubling of the tax base. And look at it. We're no better off with two people in the family working now.
All right. So I know that we've got this funny feeling now that we've walked across all of these. It almost feels like it's the Terminator 2 scenario where you're walking across this field of skulls. But it's so dire. But what I want to bring about now is a little bit more of a positive approach to this. And it really, I think it boils down to the individual and how to position yourself, how to structure yourself. How does a kind of revolution happen?
This is the best part of the discussion, because everything else I said before is disempowering. Yes. And on all the scenarios, you have you have to, within a logical mind, contemplate, are disempowering. And there's actually quite a lot you can do at your micro level that is empowering. And that's certainly the theme for signing off on. And, we touched on community building, know your medics, know your paramedics, know your coppers, know your farmers, accumulate, trade, barter, do exchanges with people that rather than have currency. Avoid the electronic systems that they're forwarding on to you. Do as much as you can cash. That's not because you become oily and untrustworthy, but have people that that you're quite happy to do that kind of, if you're exchanging things for, because they have successfully tarnished that as a business. Nobody should be getting involved with what two men agree to do on a great scale. If you've got a service and I've got a service, just barter. Undermine the system. Undermine the system by virtue of take away their power in terms of the proliferation of electronic money. Avoid credit. Don't put yourself on the wrong side of tertiary equations. You're just feeding the parasite. Starve the parasite. That's the game. They then die and shrivel up and drop off. How do you starve them? Keep your tax effective in terms of how you do that. Don't support, the wars and the militarization and those sort of things. Any kind of military conflict, vote down. There's virtually no military conflict, in my view, that couldn't be largely avoided. These notions of they're all last gasp aversions against complete insane people. Why would the guy of Syria want to fight a war with America? He would do almost anything to appease and get some sort of agreement or deal. We want that war and we want him out. And the only reason he's got the courage to stand by it is because he believes he's got some support and is getting some support from another equally powerful, or maybe not equally, but substantially powerful force that might be able to sustain him, and the probability of trying to escape into exile and not facing some kangaroo court.
Would you mind, it's a theory that I've been trying to think of, and it's going to probably be a little bit hard for me to explain, but with being a Chartist, right, it's almost like an antivirus to the rigged system, because how there's powers, they know the rates, they can rig it, and the system works against all the traders. Now, as the frequency of Chartists come about, they eventually can work at mass like a field of animals that turns the environment against the power structures. And then almost like the asset transfer becomes not to this elitism, but it comes to the wise.
Well, I would love to say that we get it right all the time with the Chartists, but having the inside scoop is certainly the most powerful position to have. What we can do is we can follow the money of them, because we can see the volume increase and we can see the price behavior and we can see the support levels, and we can sometimes deduce and structure a way to win, but we can also lose, and we do lose, but you can control the losses and you can often have highly rewarding wins. We've landed a 62.5 risk reward trade on a sell-off on the USD JPY. And that was on yen strengthening against the dollar. That's a currency that you can trade in great volume. So we have had our successes, and the euro Swiss franc being another case, and in equities as well. I get bounced into many mergers and acquisitions, and knowing that they were going to militarize, and that all these military stocks were going to shoot the moon. So unfortunately, sometimes you have to follow them into their despicable little industries to make that money, and you can't be moralistic about owning an arms company, but you will sell it at some point. And better you, as a libertarian and underminer, take that profit and then go buy gold and silver that you take out of the system, that they can no longer, because they've got a massive betting game on the back of a certain amount of physical that they believe they control, not necessarily own, control. So hypothecation is where the one bar has been promised to many people. And when the first guy comes and collects it, then suddenly all the others are without. And if a lot of people start to have security of tenor, which we've already begun to see the cracks in the system, with the whole Germans wanting their gold back and the Dutch getting some of it back after cooperating with that Malaysian airline story. And they got basically Ukraine's gold, a part thereof, and the rest got whisked away. It's interesting how in World War, if you study your history, how the Germans went straight to the French vault for the French gold. And many people don't realize that the French fleet was burnt, but the gold made it off to America. So, there's interesting things to be learned by these historical events. So go study, go read, and then accumulate and have real currency that you can share between each other. That is essentially an off-grid. We'll always need a transfer system, medium of exchange. I just don't believe in the electronic variety because that falls under the control structure. And as long as I disapprove of the control structure, you want to starve them of that.
This is a good segue into one of the areas I'd like us to cover. So I think we definitely agree with each other that cash is a great thing to keep, particularly if you can store it on your own person. Precious metals, particularly on the physical form, is wise. I wouldn't say there's any problem in having that. Now, cryptocurrency, that's the interesting one. And I think this is where we've got a little bit of a divergence of view, but I think this is going to be a very interesting little point here. I agree with you to a certain extent that there potentially could be co-opted cryptocurrencies, particularly the mainstream one like Bitcoin. You know, the internet is one of the biggest controlling systems that has controlled humanity, but also it's the biggest opportunity for us to awaken, in a sense. Now, I almost see the same thing with cryptocurrency, because you can remain anonymous and you can freely trade with another person. And as the technology gets better, and there is a multitude of currencies, thousands upon almost billions of different currencies of different values, then that's potentially a way to circumnavigate the power structures. I'd just like to hear how you would take that.
Cryptocurrencies, I have my suspicion over, because as long as you have the same forces in power and you have something that is electronic, they have access to that. There are backdoors in everything. There's backdoors in your iPhone. Google Chrome is recording you verbally, your voice, you know. Yeah, there's a couple of articles going around and you see it how, and you can have to go find how you potentially can disable that. So there's certain opt-outs, but the default is always more information. They have backdoors in everything. So there's no ways they called off the attack dogs on Bitcoin without having the backdoors that they want. And that might be just for later income tax inquiries in terms of checking whether you've paid what you should have paid, or profiling to see how you spend your money. So they have information on you. Wherever there's an asymmetry, there's an imbalance situation. And I'm not for asymmetries. I don't want them to have that level of information on me without me having that level of information about them. And just by our participation in the grid right now, this call can be called, or whether it's posted on YouTube, etc., can be transcribed very easily by a robot or computer. So, you know, at any point you become an activist of interest to them, they can have an entire file dropped on their desk for someone to examine. So that is the spoiler for crypto. That is the spoiler. I do something on barter for you, and you do something for me, or I have to balance it up with a Krugerrand because you've, you know, put a fence around my property. That's nobody's business unless you elect to tell the people of that. And if you feel you want to pay an income tax on that differential in terms of what I did for you, then we both declare it on our forms and we do it. That's not enforced on you. And I think when you have to play defense against these guys, you have to play defense and they have to be resisted. There's no half compliance. You either go wholesale in and say, I'm utterly going to comply with everything, and you absolutely grab the web. Let's not fool ourselves. I see things always in balance. There's both good and bad. You can't just be positive and then just not see the dark side. But you can't just sit on the dark side and morbid everybody out with the end of the world gloom. I've built an entire business on the basis that I can have YouTube. I've got people that are contacting me, that enjoy the material, that are prepared to engage me and pay me for services. So it's awesome, the web. You know, in the same way, it's hideous. It's also awesome. I see it for all its opportunities, and I intend to exploit it for all its opportunities. That's why I'm on the web with some of these opinions. I'm prepared to just be out there. You know, let them swing in the wind a little bit. I'm vulnerable. You know, people have no idea of how I think. They can decide how sincere I am about what I say, and I'm saying this is how I feel. So the profilers know where they stand with my view and my contempt for the system and what they're going to propagate, what I believe they're going to end game propagate on us. But at the same time, I can't help but not have the advantages of this technology as well.
Yeah. With cryptocurrency, I mean, obviously, you could say that there's secret societies that potentially are working in the background, And the whole idea of cryptocurrency is secrecy in itself. It's using complex algorithms to descramble and cipher information. So you can see that it potentially could come from that area. So I would say you're definitely grounded on the right side of thinking. And the complexity side of cryptocurrency is, unless you're an advanced programmer, to know all the back doors of things is going to be very hard and tricky to work out. But I just say that with the multitude of currency, you can't, unless there's literally, you can only use Bitcoin and everything else is outlawed, or certain regulated cryptocurrencies are the fine ones and everything else is outlawed, the competition level, there will be more of an anonymous currency that's going to be released and people are going to gravitate to that. There are certain circumstances, maybe quantum computers might be able to crack certain algorithms and decipher information. And that might only just stop transactions, but you can still keep value to a certain extent. So I can still see what hangs in the balance for cryptocurrency. I wouldn't necessarily just switch off a light on it. I can definitely see that there are glimmers of hope within cryptocurrency, and potentially to say that it could be a world where we don't even have to have any rulers, whereas, say, great speculators can use these currencies.
And if you're controlling the world at the moment, are you going to allow this massive liberating force to develop and grow? Especially when you had it by the throat and the hackers were ripping down its exchanges and causing mayhem in it, at one point, and then it was crashing back down and the system structure was almost under siege.
Sure.
It's just, I look logically at the situation as it stands and say all these things. I mean, WhatsApp is, I get all these notifications. This is encrypted and all of that. I just laugh out loud since Facebook has bought it. We've seen that Facebook have run social experiments by adjusting mood on people's feeds in entire clumps. These guys are playing games with the information you're giving them. We're giving them all this information and we're not valuing it. And they are running crowd-controlled tests.
Yes.
Literally. Crowd-controlled tests. They've got caught, and this is not me making this up. You look at it, and there's Sheryl Sandberg having to admit what they were doing, etc., etc.
Yep.
These are manipulations just like the media.
True.
So the game never changes for me on these guys. The more you're told how something is safe and is unhackable, the more it's a case of that's what they need you to believe. You need to have controlled hangouts that people believe are escape hatches. So the most aggressive libertarians all herd up inside your abattoir for their own slaughter and put big fat red flags on their heads, believing that, yes, this is where the really fly guys that truly operate under the radar go. They need you to believe that. And the system will sell that.
I agree. That's a great argument.
The system will sell that. The same as if you believe that anything I put on WhatsApp could never be used against me or extracted if they really, really wanted it. The first thing I see if I do it, I look at it right now, get it up for you because I can't even remember the verbiage they use. Messages you send to this chat and calls are now secured with end-to-end encryption. Tap for more info.
Yep.
Doesn't matter. Someone's got the key. Someone important's got the key. The average idiot won't get it. It's not the average idiot I'm worried about. It's the big idiot, the main idiot.
That's true. But there's even a case with cryptocurrency that you can actually be completely off the grid. If you've got an individual electrical device, I can go up to you in the street and this could be detached from the internet entirely. And then we could just do a little pay wave against each other and still transact. I know this still sounds very, very dodgy and things like that, but I'm just saying there's potential there. There's opportunity there that might counteract.
Potential, but the potential is determined by who controls it and who's extracting that potential for whose benefit. That's the issue. The technology is enabling.
Yes.
There's potential in a gun, but in the wrong hands, it becomes the wrong thing. It can be a provider of regular stag meat for someone living out in the bundu with his family, and it can be a murder weapon in a cinema. There's potential in it, but it's all the potential, and what of that potential is being realized is determined by the person who holds the power of that potential in their hands. If you want off the grid, you go Mormon. That's how you off the grid.
Yep.
You pick up your haystack, pitchfork. You don't hold a mobile phone. You don't hold the internet, and you ride a horse-driven buggy. And generally, the state doesn't know what kind of a guy you are, apart from the fact that you're a Mormon. And you don't even get a passport. You don't get an ID book. You don't even get a birth certificate. You be a human, and you opt out of a legal system instead of being a legal person or entity. You just say, I'm not a citizen of anything. I'm not anybody. I'm a human with human rights. Don't call me the person Francis or Hunt or Charles Owen. That is already legalese, and you're contracting with me to deal with you on a legalese level, and I reject that. You literally have to go that far and reject everything, right down to the birth certificate, which surrenders you as a right and a citizen. The wordage in some of this, you'll be shocked if you go read it all. Custody of state and all sorts of nonsense. The control structures have existed for far too long for me to really believe that you ever truly will escape them. That sounds frustrating, but it seems true.
Let's just say, all right, there's definitely a flawed act in you trying to do some kind of off-the-grid cryptocurrency scheme to have some different method of a value transaction system. But there's another argument to be said that, let's just say, the government powers. Okay, the government is a very old draconian system. Now, potentially, there's different ways and measures to start to erode a government to be reduced to its minimalist state. And a potential way of doing that is, say, if I float a currency, a cryptocurrency, for example, and there is, for example, a metric whereby on that currency, say, this is just a quick example. Let's just say if you collect my garbage bins in this local area, the cryptocurrency will award you with extra value. So what I try and analogize here is that there's different mechanisms, this system in which the government starts to become eroded, particularly because with cryptography, you do not need or do not require a trusted party. So a government always acts as an intermediary for you to do your transactions, to put all your information up. But because of cryptocurrencies not requiring this intermediary, we may have a system in which we can start to even speculate or to put levies and metrics in order to further society. So it's not even like this secretive thing that we're trying to hide our currencies from, but it's just a challenge to government in general, just to say, look, we're freely trading with ourselves. We don't really require the government here. There isn't really much point. We're seeing that you're being diminished. And maybe as the public become more aware and they say, okay, well, this is actually quite a viable standard now. We're using the government less. We're using potentially even trading cryptocurrency for education, potentially even security. So the police, as an option, as a tiny little source of light for what that future technology provides. That's where I'm a proponent for.
If you're in a parasitic existence that requires on extracting income from the 99%, you're not going to allow an independent system that for which you have no knowledge of the financial transactions and your potential stake therein. Even if they initially ignore it and there's no, tax repercussions, they'll herd everybody in till they get critical mass, and then they will move. Once you've got everyone in the abattoir, then you'll close that door. And they may even go retrospective on you. And expect retrospective. And then there might be a moratorium where if you own up and all sorts of things. And I've seen countless examples of this, in microcosm. In some senses, the abnormalities of the South African system pre-apartheid and then the subsequent fallout is very, very interesting because it looks at governments and dealing with change. We created a two-currency system at one point, a commercial rand and a financial rand. And the citizens were screwed on the financial rand, but people that were wanting to do business because we needed to attract business got a different rate. And there was actually two different spreads. And then there was the, that largely European South Africans had family and had immigrated first or second generation, and they all had money offshore. And they then had a moratorium and they forced you to declare it, else subjected you to a fine. So that money then had to be owned up to and brought back into the country if you intended to stay, or you would have probably have had to leave the country. So everything gets washed out. And for a long period, people had money, and they might have even been offshore, like the British Isles, so they weren't paying tax anywhere potentially, or small amounts. But at the end, they came for that because they knew it was there. Everything wants to be sanitized. So every control structure will wait until they have all records, and then they'll come for you. And just because you believe you've got the foolproof technical system that they won't be getting, they'll just criminalize the people that run it for defending you.
There has been definitely cases of that in the past with Bitcoin technology and the new startups surrounding that. They definitely were outlawing them quite regularly.
Yeah, no, they just criminalize them, and they're just by virtue of participation. So it's almost like they turn them into like they're professional pimps, and you are almost prostitute hunting for a tax-free transaction. And therefore you are guilty of association, and they are guilty for aiding and abetting a criminal activity that is tax evasion. So they can retrospectively come and get you. Even if, let's say, the technology is absolutely, like, there's not a government hacker that can get a finger in there, which I would doubt, because I think now the biggest employers of hackers is now this financial war and this hacking war. Let's just argue that you had one genius and, he just was absolutely rock solid and unpenetrable in your system. I'm not an expert on this topic, and I don't feel you're going to win me over on the control structures aspect. I just keep thinking like them.
Yeah.
Am I going to let this get around me? You just have to keep putting yourself in the shoes. And when they had the chance to kill it, because they'd utterly PR destroyed it at one point, they suddenly then backed off and let it run. They could have finished it and arrested all the people. And I think they did arrest, they arrested a few guys on the dark web. They were, the supposed pirate and whatever. But I mean, who created the dark web? Who's operating there if it's not the CIA and all of this doing whatever they want to do and proliferating whatever they want to do? And they're certainly in there. They certainly haven't closed it down. It's serving them. They won't let something exist that they believe in the long run won't serve them, or they have a plan to bring it in the fold. And they're just valuing the data tagging and the people it's identifying for special interest further down the line. And that's all I think you'll do. Yeah, it's a controlled hangout. It's a dead end where you get tagged with a tag.
And I'd agree. Definitely cryptocurrency for a control system is a fantastic idea as well. If you really want to control the people and have you want to know everybody's movements and completely tax everybody, I agree. That's probably one of the best approaches to take.
The best way to keep a prisoner is to think he's free, is to create the illusion where he thinks he's free and he's escaped you. The minute he thinks you beat him, the way you do someone in is he thanks you for it and thinks he's done you in.
Yeah, I definitely would say that I agree with you pretty much on most of the points that you make. I still tiptoe on the potential of it, but
you're talking about the potential of the technology, you see.
Yeah.
You're not talking above it.
Yes.
Let's say you utterly win that argument. The point of the matter is, if someone develops something, some people believe Tesla had invented energy that was totally free and inexhaustible out of a number of things. But it doesn't suit the Rockefeller tax, the oil industry, that you all pay in indirect taxation every time you start a car or you buy an item that's been driven in a truck to your supermarket store. So it dies. And they can buy it and bury it. Everyone thinks the big corporations aren't innovators. If they have a profit-leading product, and I've seen this with my father, who was a designer and engineer and did many, many things many times, better products get bought and killed to save the profit leader.
All right.
It's unfortunately not a world where everything that is best. Just a simple example that everyone knows, Betamax was a better video machine than VHS.
Yeah.
But the one just made sure they got all the content and all the best movies, and they killed it. So the best technology doesn't win. It loses for funny other reasons. But now that's just a commercial reason. That was clever, getting the content. I'm telling you, these guys will take something out and bury it, or they'll own it. And if it's better and they see it serves their purposes better, they'll take it over and they'll own it. And, you'll hand it over. Otherwise, you'll go to jail.
Yes, absolutely. So I think we're both on the agreements that we're on the edge of the cliff looking over. And not only we have the situation where our finances can be stripped from us, but potentially our freedoms can be stripped from us as well. So what is the chance for humanity to get out of this mess? How does it happen? If cryptocurrency isn't an answer to this, we'll brush that to one side for now.
I think what's disempowering is raging against the tide.
Yeah.
You need to accept that which you can change, and you need to accept that which you can't.
Right.
And you need to understand and go through a logical process where you clearly identify that. I'm not going to easily, single-handedly turn the control structures of the globe over, even if I knew exactly what to do, which I wouldn't. What I can do is understand their game and position myself best to actually come out relatively wealthier independent, financially strong, and make sure I'm not in any war zone where there might be such conflicts, if that's to be the game. Make sure that I'm positioned in assets that in relative valuation, because in an environment possibly where many things go down, just not going down as much is better, is winning. Position myself where I am not overtly due to overly viable or in the spotlight for extra governmental overreach in the way I conduct my life. I mean, I would go back to when you're born, you're given a certain amount of time and freedom. And from when that game starts and that clock starts at birth, you start running down that clock on time. And also you get certain things enacted on you that take away your freedom, from going to school and how much of your time is taken away and what values get injected into you, what drugs, when you get your injections, are put into you, and all of those, and how smart or awake your parents are, to everything that gets put in you. And then you reach a certain age where you need to develop critical thinking or Vedantic thinking, where you say, I've been given a God-given ability and a logical mind that if I actually spend enough time collecting information, I can actually work out to a degree what the game is here. And if I understand the game, then there's not an asymmetry of information. Everything they do is there to maintain an asymmetry of information, and that is their control.
Yes.
That means they can feed you horse shit through the media, and if you're buying any element of that, you're under a belief system. Because what you then start to take for granted then becomes a belief system. You believe that X and Y happened. You believe a lone gunman shot Kennedy and Martin Luther King and all of this. You believe in Santa Claus and puppy dogs and, apple pie, and the government loves you and is doing their best for you. But it's really difficult. Or you say there's some stuff that doesn't add up. There's quite a evil system that can bite. How do I stay well away from it as much as possible? How do I become self-reliant as much as possible? How do I protect my family and teach them to become self-reliant? And that is the game. And that is the game, and you can win at that. And you can take immense satisfaction in winning at that. Can you roll back monarchies and religions and control structures that have been highly penetrated and are in this massive web? It's a big ask. It's a big ask in a single lifetime. And can you expect it truly to all evaporate and not just to morph into the new post-reset? No, you can't. I don't believe easily you can. But what you can do is reduce the amount that you support it, reduce the amount of blood it sucks from you, and get back the time of your life and start enjoying your life and experiences. Because when your time's up, you're done. You're cooked and that's over. I was out riding adventure bikes and having a whale of a time, seeing Zimbabwe with close mates, talking about this and many other topics and having a drink, and it served me really, really well. Does it really serve you to be in the super tax bracket and to be paying PAYE and toiling 14 hours? I love trading, but I don't sit 14 hours in front of 9 screens trying to watch every little twitch and tick. I go back I'm a lifestyle trader. I want to love big. I want to experience big. I want to go to South America on, a GS 1200 or whatever the bike is. I want to see in the same day, the jungle. I want to see the volcano crater, and I want to see their sea. And I want to see the simple people, the ordinary people, the happy kids with their smiles, and have a nice cheap holiday and an amazing experience. And that's the best you should look to do for yourself, because you're just you. Sometimes I think I get too big and too high up on, raging against the machine. You can also just wear yourself out and bum yourself out.
Yes.
And get totally depressed. Just unplug. Put that flipping phone one side, get off grid for a while, and just be in good old mates' company and do something adrenalizing but fun. Doesn't have to be excessively dangerous. Just lying on a beach doesn't tend to work for me. So an adventure, a journey, someplace new. So it's travel, it's excitement, it's motorcycles. That's what works for me. We do a bit of whitewater rafting on the day. You have a bit of funs and thrills. And then you sit and chew it all over and chat about it. And you made some mates, and that's kind of what works for me. I wouldn't mind studying alternative histories and, the Aztec and Peru and, cities that are buried under the ocean that prove that in fact civilization existed long before the injected history you were given in your school classes, because they don't know any better, the teachers, and they're told what to tell you. go learn a little bit of real thing. There's a truth seeker in me. That'll give you immense satisfaction in learning something new, or just considering other probabilities. You might not know what's fact, but go listen to what other probabilities. It's a fascinating narrative. And the more you understand of a history, the more you're going to see forward, the more, and be a futurist. And understanding history and futurism is one and the same. So see how people have reacted. Watch and read about the fall of the Russian Empire. The Roman Empire. Yep. You can also have a look at the USSR for that matter and see how all of these things come apart and how they rot from within, and see it and just position and learn and do your savings and investments. Do your savings and investment. Pay yourself first, because your savings and your investment is when you pay yourself. Your salary isn't where you get paid. The salary is where all of the seagulls and the gannets all start dipping into your plate and ripping pieces out. And what's left for you, pay yourself first. Get that every month. That, whatever it is, £500 a month into your gold and silver, or 1,000 if you can do it, or 50 if you can only afford $50, because that empowers you. And each month you start a little bit better off than the previous month. So do the things that empower you, that make you feel better and prepare you. Keep learning about all of the aspects of the economy. I mean, in deflation, what do you buy? The gold and silver might not work, but there could be stagflation and hyperinflation at some point, whether it's first or not. So I think the gold and silver will serve you regardless. But there's certain things that'll go down. Maybe you can have a long-term short in something, invest in a bond fund portfolio that is an ultra short, and just wait for them to cheat and look at what they're doing and see if it's going to grow. Maybe some mining, small cap miners. I was talking to a hedge fund, a South African who's very independently wealthy, who's basically manages his own money. And I think he's got quite a sizable minority stake in a Toronto listed mining company that's churning out 500,000 ounces a year that he expects will be on 900,000. He's investigating it. He's doing it. So, I mean, those sort of things. Inhale life. Know that, at the end, it'll be the end. Love. And that's my game. And inform and invest people. Don't watch people grinding themselves down, doing barely productive jobs, being taxed into oblivion, and being given just enough to show up the next day, and slowly watch the life and the zest drain away from them as they complete the trade of giving their freedom and their time away for a menial existence on a treadmill. That is martyrdom that gets no statues, and that is a tragedy. And don't do it for anybody else. They're not paying you. They're not loving you. They think you're an idiot, and they're just sucking that blood. So, keep your own blood for yourself.
We're watching the parasite eat the host, aren't we? It's that turning point where it's almost like you've seen Fight Club before, where Tyler Durden's sitting back and we're watching the big companies explode in front of our eyes. And there's definitely a position to take where you're taking one step back from it and viewing it. And there's also the calls out. There's people like you, there's other people that are beacons for people to say there's hope, there's an awakening, people are realizing these things. The more this information gets out, more things potentially could change for the better.
I've got something I'd like to add. I don't want to go Tony Robbins on anybody. It's not my style at all. I'm complete anathema of that. But I would say your disciplines that you seek to impose on yourselves, the freedom is to select those disciplines that you seek to impose on yourselves, and those will always, when you subject yourself, to self-imposed discipline, it's the surest way to increase your quality of life. So, just an idea, start your day fairly early. Get a meditation in. If you don't know what it is, go learn about it. Go do TM. It calms your mind. When the chaos comes, it's the calm-minded, not the emotionally reactors that are going to be doing well. Start preparing for it now. You can't start learning to meditate when it's all going down. Do it now. Meditate for 20 minutes in the morning. You'll be calmer and more productive in everything you do. The opportunities will come to you. People will seem nicer, and they'll comment that you seem a nicer guy. So be relaxed. You'll be calm. In spite, when all others are losing their heads, you'll be keeping yours. Do a wee bit of exercise. I do a cold shower in the morning. I call them the warrior showers. It starts a little bit hot, and once you just got on, turn it full ball cold. Absolute kick your ass, wake you up. It's invigorating, keeps you fit and strong, keeps your blood. These are silly little rituals that actually are like self-imposed disciplines that you can do. Eat accurately, Eat accurately for your nutrition, not for calorie count. Lots of empty calories. Get greens in, drink water. I do quite high protein, low carb because it works for me. Keep lean, keep active, exercise, get your endorphin rush in. You don't have to be, I do home exercise. You don't have to pay gym fees and all of that. I've got a chinning bar in it, which I can do dips on, and a kettlebell and a couple of push-up handles, and I can knock myself out in that. Do one of the other, and on the bad days, do something small, but just do. Stick to the routine. Realize that every time you take control over your own life, you are less part of the people that are having their blood sucked on the treadmill. You're keeping yourself vital. You're keeping yourself mentally engaged. You're keeping yourself alert. So by eating clean, living good, you're just resonating at a higher energy. Business gets drawn to you, and you're efficient with it. Sure. You're efficient with it with regards to the control structure and how they deal with you. Yes, you're going to have to pay something, just by engaging and all of that, but be accurate with all of that. Remember, your first loyalty is to yourself and your family. And you can't serve your family if you aren't looking after yourself. So knocking yourself out in a 9-to-5 job that you hate is something I had to opt out of very quickly. And you need to take the risk to do that. You need to take the risk and to believe you can do it. And to have that belief system, you need to develop your skills, and you need to be in a good space and energy. So you need to be in decent physical nick. You need to be in decent medical nick to take that on. Because the risk is actually in staying exactly where you are. You don't realize that you need to take the risk to move out of that hateful job that is giving you just enough to make a mortgage payment, and you're not saving anything else, and you're being full whack tax, and you don't have a limited company with any deductions or anything like that. Get educated. And the other thing is that DeMartini series that I did, that I might have mentioned, is very much about value systems. If you want to build wealth and you want to have savings and investments, and the wealthy people are the ones that will be smart and have the people that can make them more tax efficient and guide them through some of these things, you have to start valuing it. So that means you have to start reading about it, and you have to start developing your skill sets and seeing what you must do. And you have to pay yourself first. And you suddenly start reeling all these things you haven't been doing, and start doing those and feel something change in you, and the feeling that you're getting a bit of your power back instead of that helplessness towards this raging crash that could take your job away, that could diminish your pension, that could do all these horrible things. Suddenly now, you're not waiting for some institution to provide you with a pension. You're building your own wealth. You're stacking, and you're holding where that stuff is stacking. You have the control over it, and you're putting it in things that are going to do doubly well, and you're educating yourself to see why. And I've got a YouTube channel you can follow it. Your podcasts are going to be interesting. You've got amazing guests. People can just start following this and start listening to the alternative media and escaping that which is being marketed to through the traditional channels, which are largely just abattoirs, all of them. They're all controlled hangouts to herd you into an abattoir where you think you're escaping. So get the alternative media and people that really get the control structure game. And I'm telling you, that's the positive message to finish on. Know your farmer, know all your other stuff, the prepper. Get a home, solar panels and rainwater collection, and fight these clowns like the Nestle head that say, you don't own the water that falls on your roofs. Yeah. If ever there was a cause for a public assassination, that was one. Just resist that and collect your own water. Yep. Work on the basis that all government provision of network services could go down. How would you fare? Have chickens. I've got a mate in the plot and the lot. He's got chickens. He has his own fresh eggs. He has lemon trees. He has fruit. He has an organic green garden. Technically speaking, he captures his own water. The solar panels, independence. You get batteries to put it up. Just be. Then what do you fear? The amazing thing is the minute you remove fear, you just see the possibilities of things. The minute you're reliant on other things, and those other things could let you down or hold you to ransom. In other words, they own the monopoly. Warren Buffett always wanted to invest in things that controlled the monopolies. He wanted a drug addict as a client. That's why he invested in cigarettes. He wanted a drug addict and a client. He wanted the only bridge to the other side. In other words, he was never really a capitalist. He was an oligarchist monopolist. I don't blame him. I wouldn't mind making the money for having that monopoly, but don't call me a capitalist. He doesn't want to compete with the other guy who has the bridge. He wants all the bridges. That's why he bought the strongest paper in Washington and, had the Washington Post and all of these brands, because to have that level of penetration, it would be impossible for a new paper to get. People were used to their Washington Post or whatever the case may be. So do those things so that you're no longer relying on any systems. And eventually there's nothing that can fail that's going to have a material negative effect in your life. So then you just secure your security so that the uneducated masses can't come and steal your gear, and you're ready to start helping people do it for themselves and build a community around it where all those people are doing it. And then suddenly you've had a major positive effect, and then you become a community leader because everyone respects you. You freed them from fear. You've got them saving money. And now they're saving in silver and gold. And now you actually have people you can transact with in silver and gold.
Yep.
That are offline. And suddenly you have neighborhood watches and you have all sorts of things being organized. And everyone is saying, we look out for each other. And you got your local farmer and you're selling your eggs from your chickens and you're getting a bit of extra greens and all of that stuff. I know it sounds a little bit quasi-rural, maybe a little bit, but I don't believe in the excessive urbanization. What do you do if you live in a city in an apartment right now? Know somebody who lives on a plot. Talk to your brother and your family. Get back in touch with them if they're on a plot of land and a bit older than you. Go and engage with people that are. Australia's got much more open space. So, I mean, I'm sure everybody knows somebody, but redevelop those links. Have a holiday home in the countryside, or even a place you rent in the beginning if you can't afford to buy, that you can get out and slowly start getting to know people there, and then slowly get a piece of land, and maybe you can build something for yourself and do this whole full-blown prepper tiny home. It doesn't have to be expensive, your container homes. How awesome. They're giving them away. There's no trade. Buy the stuff that nobody wants. There's no trade going on. Buy 4 containers. Get skills. Do barter skills. I'll build your website if you'll come and weld this and that. Build a home. Do a project. Build a home and say, I want to do this with 10,000 US Aussie dollars. And right the way through to decorate it. Get recycled furniture. Do everything. Turn it into a project. Get the family involved. Do positive, proactive things. Next thing you know, you're owner of a recycled, quite attractive home on a shoestring of a budget that entirely you own. You're collecting your own water, your own heat, and you fear nothing. You fear nothing, and you know all your neighbors, and it's as safe as hell.
I think that's an absolute wonderful message. And it's interesting that we've been in this perpetual stage where you can prep for ages. I mean, problems were a warning to us even in the early 2000s. So you've had a big opportunity for a long time now to prep for this, and we may be getting close to that point now. But also another thing is that this kind of message is almost like a trade in itself, whereby at some point in the future, this message is going to go into a bull run and everyone's going to look back at this kind of thing and all the work that you've done on YouTube and say, my gosh, how much he got it right every time there.
Well, I hope so in terms of the prepping and being able to inspire people to learn a new trade. I was very narrow. I was terrible hands. You've got to learn to do something apart from just screw a light bulb. And it's an awesome opportunity and it's a great journey rather than seeing it as a chore, saying I'm going to be skilling up in areas I might find a whole bunch of new interests. There's a whole new world opening up to me. Let's do some projects, watch less football. I don't have a TV here. I don't have a TV in this flat. This is one nutter sausage. Yeah. Don't watch it. I don't watch it at all. I spend most of for entertainment, I go onto YouTube. That doesn't mean there isn't shit on there. It doesn't mean there isn't misdirects on there either. But there's also a little bit of good stuff, and you've got enough common Vedantic sense to see some sincere advice that'll actually inspire you and get you to take action. And I would say everyone should start a pet project. If I could set everyone a pet project to go learn on, I'd say go be fitter, healthier, trans-meditative bloke who has his own prepper home, which is entirely grid independent on every level. The water grid, the sewerage grid, the whole shooting match. And do it just as a project for a journey of learning, and take heart that you'll also be green, you'll be carbon neutral, and you will be setting yourself free from ever relying on state control structures, and develop your community and be networked with good people that want the same thing, and educate them, share the news, and take on that project and watch how the fear drains away about some of the things we said. Fear will absolutely drain away. If everybody did it, property is one of the most financially assets. They're the best way that they get you on the compound interest equation. I want you to have a 10 grand house, not $1 million house.
Yes.
Because I don't want you to have that $950,000 mortgage. Simple as that. I don't want you to be wage slave for 40 years paying that damn thing off, hoping that you're going to get there, paying some usury to the control structure. So rather have the 10 grander. If you want to upgrade and it's not fancy enough for you, do it again. You're smarter the second time, do it again. Or get someone else to do some of it and pay a little bit more now that you've been saving all that time and you saved all that rent by having your own home that you fully paid for with your 10,000 US. That's 4 container homes with a bit of barter work and everything. Set yourself a challenge. I really like that challenge. And, it might be something I set myself to do. I want to live and I want to be aligned. And it's something I've been thinking about a long time. And I think it's time I started doing some of these things, but I want to be able to do them all. And I want to just think they can pull the plug now. They could switch everything off, the mobile network. Not that I'm saying that this is what they would do, but when we had 7/7, all these things went down. No one could phone anybody for a while. The internet stopped working. There was a lot of things that went down that had no bearing on the actual tube attacks. So, there's reasons for that. They can control the message that gets out. So if the whole lot went down and you had no news, you could just crack on. You've got a dirt bike, you've got a quad bike or whatever, you've got a big piece of land with plenty of space and you're self-sufficient and you could help others and help people around you. One of the reasons we all subservient to a control structure is because we've been happy to follow and be ruled too. We have to acknowledge and accept the role we've allowed to have happen. Yes, they creeped this whole system over us over time. And yes, you were born into it. But generations before us and us have all allowed ourselves to have our rights stripped from us, allowed, them to continue to grow government and buy people off and lobby and build the system. So they've played the long game and they've done it on a generational basis. They're exceedingly patient. We have to do the same. And in the meantime, we have to stop funding them. So we have to stop being controlled. They've assumed the right to rule and then we've allowed them to rule us. That's two parts to that equation. A, rejecting them as rulers, and B, taking some responsibility for self-determining ourselves.
Beautiful. So, Francis, I'm just going to thank you for all of that analysis. How can somebody get more information on what you do?
Yeah, the YouTube channel's a goodie if they want to follow. That's quite a mixed bag. So there's trading in there. Also, I provided a link there that's totally free for how to become the 9%. The masses are always wrong, typically, as Mark Twain once said, only didn't use those words, and how to position. It's very contrarian of thought. So if you're interested in trading, that's going to be very interesting. And I think if you're interested in investing as well, it's going to be useful to you. That's one place. And then the YouTube channel, which is just under my name, Francis Hunt. And you will also find that there's the Reset Phoenix, which is a podcast that I've done. And there's some interesting guests that I've interviewed, including Freemasons and people with connections. So they can go and listen to that. And some of the things with Zachmir, a technical trader that I talked to about, we're all communists now in terms of how state engagement. So kind of an update and where we are in the cycle. So a couple of things there. And then Twitter, I can be followed at the Market Sniper, at the Market singular, and then Sniper, SNI. That's just a single PER.
That's wonderful, Francis. So I think we've literally covered every single topic that I can think of under the sun here. But what I'd love to do is get in contact with you at a future stage when there's another fork in the road for us economically.
Yes, a development, yeah.
Yes, because I think there's so many things of interest that I find in you. Even though there's tiny bits of divergence here and there, I think I'm pretty much in line with you with most theories that you come up with. So it's fascinating to get all of your ideas, your technical knowledge, your fundamentals. It's a wonderful thing. And I really do think that you should be standing shoulders to shoulder with the big economic masterminds today, the ones that are actually putting their neck on the line and actually saying things which are counter views to the mainstream media. So I'm just going to say thank you very much, Francis.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. It's great praise indeed. And if people want to put me forward to those other shows, I'd value that. Because I'm happy to be a guest with the likes of, Stefan Molyneux and others like yourselves. And I'd like to proliferate the message and give everyone else the challenge so that there's a whole prepper community, a financial prepper and a lifestyle prepper. But yes, thank you. I enjoyed spending the time to you, and I look forward to proliferating and following further on your podcast work.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll conclude that there.
Excellent, Charles. Have a good day.